I never thought one evening could change everything. Until I saw him standing there, Lucas, my niece's charming nephew, his hazel eyes lingering just a moment too long. My quiet house suddenly felt alive, every shadow charged with a tension I couldn't explain. And when he leaned in, his touch lingering just a little too much, I realized this wasn't going to be the night I'd planned. Amanda's life had become a series of routines, each day bleeding into the next with a predictability that dulled her senses. Widowed at 41, she had poured her energy into maintaining a semblance of normalcy, filling her days with work, chores, and moments of solitude that felt more like survival than living. Her small, cozy home was a reflection of her, neat, structured, and utterly void of the vibrancy it once held. Her marriage had been a source of comfort and joy, a partnership built on love and trust. But when her husband passed unexpectedly, those very foundations crumbled. Amanda found herself retreating into her world, avoiding connections that might risk her already fragile emotional state. Her niece Kayla was one of the few people who could occasionally pierce that isolation, visiting her with youthful exuberance that Amanda envied but couldn't emulate. On that fateful Saturday, Amanda had been tidying the house as always, her thoughts wandering as she folded laundry and adjusted the cushions on the couch. It was a small comfort, this act of keeping things in order, even as her heart felt increasingly chaotic. Then came the phone call, Kayla, asking if her nephew Lucas could stop by to retrieve a book he'd left during their last family gathering. Amanda didn't hesitate, agreeing with a light-hearted comment about Kayla's forgetfulness. She hadn't seen Lucas in years, not since he'd transformed from an awkward teenager into a confident young man. At 25, Lucas had a presence that was hard to ignore. Athletic and self-assured, he exuded a quiet charisma that Amanda hadn't been around in ages. When he arrived at her doorstep that evening, his easy smile and relaxed demeanor caught her off guard. For the first time in years, Amanda felt self-conscious, aware of her disheveled appearance and the stirrings of emotions she couldn't quite name. As they settled into her living room, the air felt different, charged in a way that Amanda couldn't ignore. Lucas's laughter was rich and unrestrained, his compliments sincere, yet tinged with something that made her pulse quicken. And when his gaze lingered a moment too long, Amanda felt the faintest flicker of something she hadn't experienced in years. A connection, and perhaps the beginning of something more. The following days after Lucas's visit, Amanda found herself replaying moments from that evening in her mind. A laugh, a glance, a touch that lingered just slightly too long. It wasn't anything overt, she told herself. Just a friendly interaction with her niece's nephew. But even as she tried to rationalize it, there was a persistent hum of unease and anticipation coursing through her. She had noticed things she hadn't intended to. How Lucas's gaze would occasionally drop to her hands or linger on her face when she spoke, as if he was memorizing every detail. And though she had brushed it off at the time, the memory of his touch on her shoulders during that casual massage lingered. It had been so long since she felt anyone's hands on her, so long since she allowed herself the vulnerability of closeness. But this was Lucas, family of sorts. It wasn't meant to mean anything. Yet it did. Lucas began texting her casually, small messages that seemed harmless on the surface. "Thanks for letting me crash your evening, Amanda," one read. Another came a few days later. "I hope I didn't overstay my welcome the other night." The messages carried a warmth, an informality, that Amanda couldn't quite reconcile. Why was he thinking about their evening together? And more importantly, why did she feel a thrill every time her phone buzzed with his name on the screen? Her routine, once so methodical and safe, now felt disrupted. She found herself looking in the mirror longer than usual, noticing her reflection in a way she hadn't for years. She began wearing lighter makeup, fixing her hair even when she didn't plan to leave the house. It wasn't vanity, she told herself, just the need to feel put together. But deep down, she knew it was something more. The tension between them reached an unsettling peak the next time Lucas stopped by, this time under the pretext of picking up a jacket he'd left behind. He arrived with the same easy smile, his hazel eyes warm and inviting. As they talked, Amanda noticed how his gaze would flicker to her lips when she spoke, how he seemed to close the space between them without even realizing it. "I've missed being around family," he admitted as they sat on the couch, his voice low and sincere. "It's nice to just feel comfortable somewhere." Amanda nodded, unsure of how to respond. The weight of his words, coupled with the way his fingers brushed hers when he reached for his coffee mug, left her breathless. There was nothing inappropriate about his actions, yet everything about them felt loaded, intentional. That night, after Lucas left, Amanda lay in bed, unable to sleep. Her thoughts raced as she tried to make sense of what she was feeling. Was it loneliness, long suppressed, now rearing its head in the form of misplaced affection? Or was there something deeper at play? A connection that neither of them had intended but neither could deny? She began to notice small changes in herself. The way her heart would skip a beat when her phone buzzed. The way she found herself lingering in the living room, replaying his laughter in her mind. And yet, along with the excitement came a gnawing guilt. Lucas wasn't just any man. He was tied to her family, to Kayla. The lines they were skirting were not just personal. They were moral, ethical, and devastatingly fragile. As days turned into weeks, Amanda couldn't shake the feeling that her solitude had been irrevocably disrupted. It wasn't just Lucas's presence that haunted her. It was the way he made her feel alive, seen, and dangerously exposed. She started questioning everything. Her boundaries, her morals, and most terrifying of all, what she might be willing to risk to feel this way again. The next time Lucas visited, Amanda told herself it would be the last. She rehearsed lines in her head, gentle but firm, to create some distance. After all, this tension, this dangerous dance they were playing, couldn't continue. But when Lucas showed up at her door, his easy grin disarming as ever, her resolve began to waver. He stood there, holding a bottle of wine. "I figured you might need some company," he said casually, but his eyes carried an intensity that Amanda couldn't ignore. She hesitated for only a moment before stepping aside, letting him in. "You didn't have to do that," she said, motioning to the wine. "I wanted to," he replied simply, setting the bottle on her kitchen counter and flashing her that familiar smile. They settled in the living room again, the same comfortable couch that now felt anything but safe. Amanda poured them each a glass, determined to keep the conversation light. But as the wine flowed, so did their words, stories of their lives, moments of vulnerability that neither had planned to share. Lucas spoke of feeling out of place, disconnected from his peers, and Amanda found herself opening up about the loneliness that had become her constant companion. "You're not as alone as you think, Amanda," Lucas said softly, his voice carrying a weight that made her heart ache. She looked at him, her breath catching as his eyes met hers. For a moment, the world seemed to fall away, leaving just the two of them in the stillness of her living room. It was Lucas who broke the silence first, reaching out to brush a stray strand of hair from her face. The gesture was tender, his fingers lingering for a beat too long before falling away. Amanda's pulse quickened, her chest tightening as the air between them grew heavier. "You shouldn't," she whispered, but her voice lacked conviction. She felt the warmth of his presence, the way his hand had hesitated, as if asking for permission she wasn't sure she had the strength to deny. "I know," he replied, his voice low and filled with something she couldn't name. "But I can't help it." The space between them felt like an insurmountable void, and a fragile thread at the same time. Amanda leaned back, trying to create distance, but Lucas followed her movement, closing the gap with a deliberate slowness that made her head spin. When his hand brushed hers, she didn't pull away. "I don't know what this is," she said, her voice trembling. "But it feels right," he finished for her, his tone gentle but firm. She didn't argue. Instead, she looked down at their hands, her fingers lightly tracing the outline of his. Every rational thought in her mind screamed for her to stop, to draw a line in the sand and enforce it. But her heart, long starved of connection, told her something entirely different. Lucas leaned closer, his voice barely above a whisper. "Tell me to stop, Amanda." Her breath hitched, her mind racing. She knew she should say the words, push him away, and end this before it went too far. But instead, she found herself leaning toward him, her body betraying the logic she clung to. The moment stretched, fragile and infinite, as Lucas reached up to gently cup her face. His thumb brushed against her cheek, and she closed her eyes, letting herself feel the warmth of his touch. It had been so long since she'd felt this alive, this desired. When his lips brushed hers, the contact was light, hesitant, as if waiting for her permission. Amanda pulled back sharply, her heart racing. "Lucas, we can't," she said, her voice shaking. He searched her face, his expression a mixture of longing and regret. "I know," he said softly, "but I think we already have." The weight of his words settled over her, undeniable and suffocating. Amanda stood abruptly, putting space between them as her mind raced to make sense of what had just happened. She paced the room, her arms crossed tightly over her chest, but she couldn't shake the memory of his touch, the way her body had betrayed her resolve. "I think you should go," she said finally, her back to him. Lucas hesitated, but when she glanced over her shoulder, he nodded, his eyes filled with unspoken emotions. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't mean to make things harder for you." Amanda couldn't respond, as the sound of the door closing echoed through the house. She sank onto the couch, her head in her hands, and tried to steady the whirlwind of emotions tearing through her. Guilt, longing, fear, they all battled for dominance, leaving her paralyzed. As the minutes passed, Amanda realized something terrifying. This wasn't the end. The tension between them, the forbidden connection they had felt, it wasn't going away. And deep down, as much as she tried to deny it, part of her didn't want it to. The days that followed Lucas's departure were a blur of guilt and confusion for Amanda. She went about her routines like a ghost, her mind caught in an endless loop of what had happened, and what almost did. She told herself it was a momentary lapse, a mistake born out of loneliness, but the memory of Lucas's touch, his gaze, lingered far too vividly to dismiss. She thought about him constantly, replaying the tension-filled moments in her mind. Her resolve to move past it faltered when Lucas sent her a text a few days later. It was a simple message, one that shouldn't have made her heart race the way it did. "Hey, Amanda. I hope you're doing okay. Can we talk?" Amanda stared at her phone, her fingers hovering over the screen. She knew she should ignore it, delete the message, and sever the connection that was causing her so much turmoil. But instead, she found herself typing a reply. "I don't think that's a good idea, Lucas." His response came almost immediately. "Please. I just need to see you." Her chest tightened as she read the words. A part of her wanted to say no, to protect herself from the storm that would undoubtedly follow. But another part, the part that longed for the connection she had felt with him, wanted to say yes. Against her better judgment, she agreed to meet him. When Lucas arrived later that evening, Amanda's nerves were frayed. She opened the door to find him standing there, his expression conflicted but determined. "Thank you for letting me come," he said softly, stepping inside. Amanda didn't respond, leading him into the living room instead. They sat on opposite ends of the couch, the tension between them palpable. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then Lucas broke the silence. "I can't stop thinking about you," he admitted, his voice low and earnest. "I know it's wrong. I know we shouldn't feel this way. But I can't help it, Amanda." His words sent a shiver down her spine. She wanted to tell him to stop, to leave, but the honesty in his voice, the vulnerability in his eyes, made it impossible. "Lucas, this can't happen," she said, her voice trembling. "It's not just about us. It's about Kayla, about the family." "I know," he interrupted, leaning forward. "I know all of that. But I also know that I've never felt this way before. Not about anyone." Amanda's breath hitched as his words sank in. She wanted to deny it, to tell him he was wrong, but she couldn't. The truth was, she felt it too. The undeniable pull between them, the connection that defied logic and reason. Before she could stop herself, she whispered, "I feel it too." The confession hung in the air like a fragile thread, binding them together and threatening to unravel everything. Lucas moved closer, his hand reaching out to gently touch hers. The warmth of his skin against hers sent a wave of electricity through her, and for a moment, she forgot about the consequences. She forgot about Kayla, the family, and the moral lines they were crossing. All she could think about was Lucas, the way he looked at her, the way he made her feel alive again. But the moment was shattered when the front door suddenly opened. "Amanda!" Kayla's voice rang out, bright and unsuspecting. Amanda froze, her heart pounding as Kayla stepped into the living room, her smile faltering when she saw Lucas sitting so close to her aunt. "What's going on?" Amanda pulled her hand away from Lucas's as if she had been burned, her mind racing for an explanation. "Kayla," she stammered, forcing a smile. "What are you doing here?" Kayla's eyes darted between them, suspicion flickering across her face. "I came to pick up my scarf. I didn't know Lucas was here." Lucas stood abruptly, his face pale. "I was just leaving," he said quickly, avoiding Kayla's gaze as he made his way to the door. "See you later, Amanda." The door closed behind him, leaving Amanda and Kayla in an oppressive silence. Amanda could feel her niece's eyes on her, could see the unspoken questions swirling in her mind. "It's not what you think," Amanda said finally, her voice shaky. Kayla crossed her arms, her expression unreadable. "Then what is it?" Amanda hesitated, unsure of what to say. She could feel the weight of her niece's gaze, the way it pierced through her carefully constructed facade. "Lucas and we've just been talking," she said weakly. Kayla didn't look convinced. "Talking about what?" she pressed. "Because from where I'm standing, it looked like something else. Amanda opened her mouth to respond, but no words came out. She felt exposed, vulnerable, and utterly ashamed. She had always prided herself on being a good role model for Kayla, someone she could look up to. And now, in the span of a few moments, she had shattered that image. Kayla's eyes softened, and she let out a sigh. Look, I don't know what's going on between you and Lucas, but if it's what I think it is, you need to stop. For everyone's sake. Amanda nodded silently, her throat tight with unspoken words. She watched as Kayla picked up her scarf and left, the sound of the door closing behind her echoing in her ears. When she was alone again, Amanda sank onto the couch, her head in her hands. The weight of what had just happened pressed down on her, suffocating and relentless. She had crossed a line, one that could never be uncrossed. And now she had to face the fallout. The truth was out, or at least part of it, and Amanda knew that the consequences would be devastating. But as she sat there, replaying the events in her mind, she realized something even more terrifying. Despite everything, she couldn't bring herself to regret it. The days following Kayla's unexpected visit were some of the longest and most excruciating Amanda had ever endured. She could barely sleep, her mind replaying the look on Kayla's face as she pieced together the unspoken truths lingering in the air. Every ring of her phone made her stomach churn, dreading a confrontation she knew was inevitable. Amanda spent her mornings attempting to keep busy, scrubbing countertops that were already spotless and rearranging furniture in a futile effort to distract herself. But nothing could silence the voice in her head, accusing her of betraying the very people she cared for most. She thought of Lucas constantly, but it was no longer with the same thrill of anticipation. Now her thoughts were clouded with guilt, shame, and a nagging fear of what might happen next. When the phone call finally came, it wasn't from Kayla. It was from Lucas. "I think we need to talk," he said, his voice careful, almost hesitant. Amanda hesitated before replying. "Lucas, I don't think that's a good idea. Not after what happened." "I know," he said quickly. "But I can't just leave things like this. Please, Amanda. I need to see you." Against her better judgment, Amanda agreed to meet him. They chose a quiet park on the outskirts of town, where they could speak without fear of interruption. As she approached the bench where Lucas was waiting, Amanda felt her heart hammering in her chest. He stood when he saw her, his expression a mixture of relief and worry. "Thank you for coming," he said, his voice soft. Amanda nodded, sitting down beside him, but keeping a deliberate distance. "Lucas, I don't know what you want me to say," she began, her tone weary. "Everything about this is wrong. We both know that." "I know," he replied, his hands clasped tightly in his lap. "But what I feel for you, it's not something I can just turn off. And I don't think you can either." Amanda looked away, her throat tightening. "What we feel doesn't matter," she said firmly. "It can't matter. Not when it could destroy everything." Lucas was silent for a moment, his gaze fixed on the ground. "Do you think Kayla knows?" he asked finally. Amanda's stomach churned at the question. "I don't know," she admitted. "But if she does, Lucas, I don't think I could ever forgive myself." The weight of her words hung between them, heavy and oppressive. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then Lucas reached out, his hand brushing hers lightly. "I'm sorry," he said quietly, "for putting you in this position. For everything." Amanda pulled her hand away, her eyes brimming with unshed tears. "We both made mistakes, Lucas. But this has to stop. It has to." He nodded reluctantly, his jaw tightening. "I understand." When they parted ways, Amanda felt a hollow ache settle in her chest. She knew it was for the best, but the finality of their decision left her feeling more alone than ever. Back at home, Amanda tried to resume her life, but the fallout of her actions was impossible to ignore. Kayla, once a constant presence in her life, became distant, her texts short and infrequent. Family gatherings felt strained, the warmth and ease that once defined them replaced by a palpable tension. One evening, Amanda found herself staring at a framed photo of her late husband. His kind smile and steady presence had been her anchor for so many years, and she couldn't help but wonder what he would think of the woman she had become. She felt a deep shame, not just for what had happened with Lucas, but for the choices that had led her to this point. The guilt was relentless, gnawing at her during every quiet moment. Yet, despite everything, Amanda couldn't completely regret what had happened. Lucas had awakened something in her that she thought was long dead, a sense of vitality, of connection, of being seen. It was intoxicating, even as it was devastating. The fallout spread beyond her immediate circle. Kayla's mother, Amanda's sister, began asking pointed questions about the growing distance between Amanda and her niece. Friends noticed the changes in her demeanor, her withdrawn nature, and began to pry. Amanda deflected their inquiries with half-truths, but the pressure of maintaining the facade took its toll. Eventually, Amanda decided she couldn't live like this anymore. She called Kayla, asking to meet. Her niece agreed, though her tone was clipped, the warmth that once characterized their relationship conspicuously absent. When they met at a local cafe, Amanda felt her heart constrict at the guarded expression on Kayla's face. "Thank you for coming," Amanda said, her voice tentative. Kayla nodded, her arms crossed over her chest. "What's this about?" Amanda hesitated, searching for the right words. "I wanted to apologize. For everything. I know I've let you down, and I hate that I've hurt you." Kayla's expression softened slightly, but her posture remained stiff. "I don't know what's going on with you and Lucas," she said, her voice carefully neutral. "And maybe I don't want to know. But whatever it is, it needs to stop. He's family, Amanda. And so are you." Amanda nodded, tears pooling in her eyes. "I know. And it has stopped. I promise you." For the first time in weeks, Amanda felt a glimmer of hope. The road to rebuilding her relationships would be long and fraught, but she was determined to try. As she watched Kayla leave the cafe, Amanda felt a deep sense of loss, but also a newfound resolve. She couldn't change the past, but she could choose a better path forward. In the weeks that followed her conversation with Kayla, Amanda began the slow, painful process of piecing her life back together. The weight of her actions lingered, a constant reminder of the fragility of trust and the consequences of crossing boundaries. But with time, she started to rebuild, not just her relationships but her sense of self. Amanda avoided Lucas entirely, ignoring his texts and avoiding family gatherings where he might be present. It wasn't easy. Every message she left unanswered felt like another wound, another reminder of the connection she had severed. But it was necessary. She knew that allowing any contact would only prolong the pain and confusion they both felt. Instead, Amanda focused on repairing her bond with Kayla. Slowly, her niece began to open up again, their conversations regaining some of the warmth and ease they once had. It wasn't perfect. Kayla was still guarded, and Amanda knew that trust would take time to rebuild. But the mere fact that Kayla was willing to try gave Amanda a glimmer of hope. In moments of solitude, Amanda reflected on what had happened and what it had taught her. She realized how deeply loneliness had shaped her decisions, how it had clouded her judgment and led her down a path she never thought she'd take. For years, she had convinced herself that she was content, that her routines and solitude were enough. But Lucas had shattered that illusion, forcing her to confront the emptiness she had buried deep inside. She began seeing a therapist, someone who could help her unpack the feelings she had long ignored. In those sessions, Amanda learned to forgive herself, not for what had happened, but for the years she had spent neglecting her own needs and emotions. She realized that while Lucas had awakened something in her, it wasn't him she truly needed. It was herself, the parts of her she had lost when her husband died, the parts she had been too afraid to reclaim. One afternoon, Amanda sat in her living room, a journal open on her lap. She wrote about the things she had learned, the importance of setting boundaries, the danger of ignoring her own emotional well-being, and the value of meaningful, healthy connections. She didn't shy away from the mistakes she had made, but she also didn't let them define her. They were lessons, painful, yes, but also necessary. In her writing, Amanda found a sense of clarity she hadn't felt in months. She resolved to open herself up to the possibility of love again, but on her own terms. She wouldn't allow herself to be ruled by loneliness or desperation. Instead, she would seek connections that were built on mutual respect, trust, and understanding. Her relationships with her family began to improve as well. At the next family gathering, Amanda was nervous but determined. She greeted Kayla warmly and made an effort to engage with everyone, even as she felt Lucas's absence like a ghost in the room. It was bittersweet, but Amanda knew it was for the best. As the evening progressed, Amanda realized that the cracks in her relationships were beginning to mend. She laughed with her sister, shared stories with her nephews and nieces, and for the first time in a long time, felt a sense of belonging. It wasn't perfect, she still had a long way to go, but it was a start. That night, as she lay in bed, Amanda thought about the journey she had been on. She had made mistakes, yes, but she had also grown. She had learned to face her loneliness, to confront her fears, and to take responsibility for her actions. And in doing so, she had found a sense of peace she hadn't known was possible. In the end, Amanda realized that life wasn't about avoiding mistakes. It was about learning from them. It was about embracing the messiness of being human and finding the strength to move forward, even when the path was uncertain. And as she drifted off to sleep, she felt a quiet hope that the road ahead would be brighter, not because it would be free of challenges, but because she was finally ready to face them. If you were in Amanda's position, what would you have done? Share your thoughts in the comments below. I'd love to hear your perspective. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more gripping stories that dive deep into life's most complex relationships. And stay tuned. Next week's story will uncover a shocking betrayal that will leave you questioning everything about love and trust. You won't want to miss it.